All right, guys, thanks for that. We'll get one more carrier update before we are done here for the day. Right now, it's time to welcome Marilyn Serber from 10 Street, getting a little bit of a pulse on the driver market right now. Marilyn, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Kaylee. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Great to have you as always to kick off April. And let's kind of get a pulse on where the driver market is after the first quarter of 2022, where we were pretty strong with those truck transportation jobs. They've now started to take a fall off of a cliff as we look at the March numbers. But let's just kind of talk about the first quarter overall.
Yeah, so we are seeing we're seeing more applicants, right, in the market, which is good for carriers, right, from a recruiting perspective. And we see, tenures are inching out a little bit longer, right? So we still haven't seen turnover rates return to what they were pre-pandemic, but we also haven't seen the application volumes return to pre-pandemic. Now it is a lot, it's increased significantly from this time last year, and it is starting to go up kind of how we would expect it to seasonally before COVID, right? So we really think from a driver hiring perspective, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the market this year, to see if things return kind of to that normal seasonality that we're used to, or we were used to before COVID. But we're certainly, we still see strong demand, for truck driving school applicants, and a strong demand for these jobs. And certainly carriers are still thinking about everything they can do to attract and retain drivers. So we haven't seen anything shift yet, right, away from that.
And Marilyn, when we're looking at these jobs throughout the first quarter, are there any anticipations of what the second quarter is going to look like? I know we're just now getting into it, but I mean, we just saw that the numbers from job openings really start to tick down for truck drivers or transportation. Are you seeing or anticipating any slowing down as well coming from these applications looking forward?
So I think that's a really good question. I think it's probably too soon to tell. I think that it just is going to depend on what happens. But I also think, truck driving jobs means a lot of different things, right? And so some of those jobs that maybe are not open anymore might be local jobs or some different things like that. But there's really that strong demand for long haul and over the road and some of those types of jobs. We just haven't seen the decrease there yet. Does that make sense? And people putting out jobs. We also had entry-level driver training, which took effect in the first quarter of 2022. And we haven't really had enough time to see how that's going to impact new CDL holders, if that's going to kind of slow up the volume, right? And we're also, one of the things that we're seeing is a strong demand for instructors, right? So that can slow down the process of hiring and getting all your trucks filled too, right? If you don't have enough people to train them at school or to train them in orientation or, to send them out on the road for their finishing program at a carrier. And so I think there's a lot of factors that that is going to play out in this second quarter.
Marilyn, we've got a chart up here for us from you guys at 10 Street about driver application activity. And this chart's really interesting because at the end of 2021, the start of 2022, it was pretty volatile. We saw some pretty big jumps in that the application activity. And now we're kind of starting to see a level off in this chart. Can you talk us through a little bit of the numbers and what each piece is really showing you right now?
Yes, let me pull it up on I don't see it on here. So I'm going to so what this graph shows all the different types of applications, whether it's a full application or a lead application. Yep, there it is. All the different kinds of apps that you can see or you can use. IA stands for Intella app, right? So that's the number of drivers who are filling out Intella apps. And exactly what you said, Kaylee. So you can see, at the beginning, the first quarter of 2021 looks very, quite a bit different, right, than the first quarter of 2022. And you can see that dip in the fourth quarter. Again, that's what the fourth quarter of 21, that's kind of normal. That's what we would expect again in a post or pre-COVID, hiring world, right? We would expect it to kind of drop off in the fourth quarter and then come back up in the first quarter. And that's exactly what we see happening. It's more drivers are filling out applications, which means there are more people in the pool, right, for carriers to go after. And so we're hoping, that it continues to kind of level off and returns to that, normal seasonality. But again, we'll see. We'll see what happens as we move into the summer months.
In Maryland, one of the big underlying trends when it comes to transportation for drivers is that retention aspect. Do you typically see any type of changes and trends for retention during different seasons for transportation? I'm thinking about different inflection points of a freight boom where there's just transportation and not enough drivers on the road, and then freight recessions where rates are just down in the dumps. Do you ever see that there's a shift in retention depending on what type of freight market we're looking at?
Absolutely. And I think, this is going to be really interesting to see what happens coming out of COVID because, we did see a lot of drivers leave during COVID to go do other jobs, right? And so traditionally in a freight downturn, we might see people leave to go do other jobs if they can be at home and make, certain kind of money, or, we see all of that fluctuate depending on what's happening in the larger economy. Like if construction and manufacturing are really strong, but trucking freight is down, then we will see people leave, traditional trucking jobs to go do construction and manufacturing. And then vice versa, if there's, those jobs slow down and trucking is big. And so it's going to be kind of a perfect mix this time whenever we see what happens, because we know demand is a little bit down, right, for freight. And we know that people are, shifting their purchasing and what are they purchasing. And, we have so many unknown factors as we go into the summer. But yes, usually what's happening in the larger economy will definitely, in what's happening in the freight market impact retention. And then also some of that seasonality that we were talking about, like as we get into summer and some other jobs might open up, turnover does tick up a little bit higher, right? And then as we go into winter, it kind of will slow down a little bit. And so we do see some seasonality there. But what we've seen now so far this year is that, turnover is still lower than it was before the pandemic, which is good. And it's so people are staying just a little bit longer, which is good for trucking companies and, good for overall retention rates.
Marilyn, I want to kind of ask you about your thoughts of these musings of, is a freight recession coming? Are we looking at a big downturn in the market? And if this is leading folks to kind of chase some job security. I know I asked this question of John Kingston last week when we were talking about the job report for March. And it's kind of interesting to think about how are people acting to get into more of a secure position before the market takes a big downturn? Is this a trend that you would typically see? And do you think that it's a good move for folks to chase that security before those jobs are gone?
I think that, most truck driving jobs are pretty secure, and so we haven't seen that yet. And I think because of the, driver application activity, I think that it's probably a few months right behind what you see from a freight and pricing standpoint. And so we're not seeing that yet, but you will see, right, if the market becomes that, it would have to fall off pretty drastically, I feel like, to really, really move the needle on retention, if that makes sense. And so I think for the most part, truck drivers are pretty secure in the fact that they can get another job. And so unless there became like a real freight recession, then you would see people kind of chasing that secure job or staying where they are. But you have to get to a little bit more of an extreme before you see that impact the way drivers apply for jobs.
Marilyn, this might be a bit of a shot in the dark, but I just love looking for underlying trends or areas that not a lot of people are looking at. When you're looking at this space, is there anything that might jump out at you that should have a little bit more attention on it, or any underlying trends that's not really kind of being brought up to the spotlight just yet?
Well, I think the trend about trainers is a real thing, right? Especially as we go into entry level, now that we have entry level driver training, because we talked about this in the beginning of COVID, right? On FreightWaves Now is when truck driving schools were closed down and state licensing agencies were closed down. That had a real long-term impact on the available drivers in the market. And even though now we may be going into a freight recession and a time of slower hiring, if that training and of new drivers entering the market slows down for any period of time, those have long-term effects on the driver hiring market. And so I think that that's a real thing that we have to say, how is this going to impact the number of drivers we can get through school? How is this going to impact the number of carriers? How fast carriers can get new students on trucks and new students scheduled for orientation? And so I think we have to watch those things and see what happens there, because if you see student hiring slow down, you see those new entrants into the market kind of slow down for a while, it may be what the carriers need right now, but then 6 months from now or 12 months from now, when it ramps back up, there's just no way to make up for what was lost. And so I think we need to pay attention to that and see what's going to happen.
Right. All right, Marilyn, thank you for being with us today. Great to have you as always. Folks want to get in touch with you guys at 10th Street. Where can they go to do that?
You can go to 10thstreet.com. You can find us on LinkedIn or Facebook, or you can email me or message me, Marilyn Serber at 10thstreet.com, and we'd love to talk to you. So thanks for having me again. I'll see you guys next month.
Absolutely. We'll see you next month.